File 20 of Farthest North, Volume 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sharon Riskedahl. Farthest North by Fridtjof Nansen, Volume 2. Appendix Chapter 3, August 15 to January 1, 1896. With the rise in the temperature, the snow surface became daily worse, so that it was seldom fit for snowshoeing. Even with trugger on, it was most laborious to get along, for the snow was so soft that we sank in up to our knees. Now and then, for an odd day or so, the surface would be fit, even in the month of July, and we took these opportunities of making short excursions for shooting and the like. Then the surface would be as bad as ever again, and one day, when I had to go out on the ice to fetch a fulmar which had been wounded, the snow was so soft that I constantly sank in up to my waist. Before I could reach the bird, the whole pack of dogs came tearing by, got hold of it, and killed it. One of the dogs seized the bird in his mouth, and then there was a wild race between it and the others. At last the whole pack turned back towards the lane in the ice again, and I watched my opportunity and snatched the bird from them. I had paid pretty dearly for my booty, all spent and dripping with perspiration as I was from plodding through that bottomless morass of snow. Our chief occupation was still the work at our sledges and kayaks. The sledges, which were all brought on board from the great hummock where they had lain all the winter, were repaired and fitted with runners. By July 16th they were all in good order, 8 hand sledges and 2 dog sledges. The kayaks, upon which we had long been engaged, were finished about the same time. We had now in all 5 double and 1 single kayak. Of these I myself made one, the single kayak, which weighed 32 pounds. All of them were tested in the channel and proved sound and watertight. Both the kayaks and the sledges were hoisted on the davits, so that they could be let down at a moment's notice in case of need. The petroleum launch, which was of no use to us as it was, but would afford good materials for runners and other things, was brought from the great hummock and taken to pieces. It was built of choice elm, and a couple of planks were immediately used for runners to those of the sledges, which for lack of material were as yet unprovided with these appliances. The medicine chest, which had also lain in depot at the great hummock, was fetched and stowed away in one of the longboats, which had been placed on the pressure ridge hard by the ship. The contents had taken no harm, and nothing had burst with the frost, although there were several medicines in the chest which contained no more than 10% of alcohol. At that time we were also busy selecting and weighing provisions and stores for 11 men for a 70 days sledging expedition and a 6 months sojourn on the ice. The kinds of provisions and their weight will be seen from the accompanying table. 70 days sledge provisions for 11 men. Cadbury's chocolate, 5 boxes of 48 pounds, 240 pounds. Meat chocolate, 25 pounds. Wheaten bread, 16 boxes of 44 pounds, 704 pounds. Danish butter, 12 tins of 28 pounds, 336 pounds. Lime juice tablets, 2 pounds. Fish flour, Professor Vaga's, 50 pounds. Viking potatoes, 3 tins of 26 pounds, 78 pounds. Nor's pea soup, 5 pounds. Nor's lentil soup, 5 pounds. Nor's bean soup, 5 pounds. Bovril, 2 boxes, 104 pounds. Vril food, 1 box, 48 pounds. Oatmeal, 1 box, 80 pounds. Sarin powder, 1 box, 50 pounds. Aleuronate bread, 5 boxes of 50 pounds, 250 pounds. Pemmican, 6 boxes, 340 pounds. Pemmican, 7 sacks, 592 pounds. Liver, 1 sack, 102 pounds, total 3,016 pounds. Besides these, we took salt, pepper, and mustard. Provisions for 11 men during a 6-month stay on the ice. Roast and boiled beef, 14 tins of 72 pounds, 1,008 pounds. Minced collops, 3 tins of 48 pounds, 144 pounds. Corned beef, 3 tins of 84 pounds, 252 pounds. Compressed ham, 3 tins of 84 pounds, 252 pounds. Corned mutton, 17 tins of 6 pounds, 102 pounds. Bread, 37 tins of 50 pounds, 1,850 pounds. Nor's soups, various, 2 tins of 56.5 pounds, 113 pounds. Vegetables, white cabbage, julienne, pot herbs, 60 pounds. Flour, sugar, 3 cases of 40 pounds, 120 pounds. Oatmeal, 4 cases of 80 pounds, 320 pounds. Groats, 4 cases of 80 pounds, 320 pounds. Cranberry, 2 cases of 10 pounds, 20 pounds. Margarine, 20 jars of 28 pounds, 560 pounds. Lunch tongue, 1 case, 20 pounds. Danish butter, 2 cases, 336 pounds. Stearine candles, 5 cases, 200 pounds. Preserved fish, 1 tin, 22 pounds. Macaroni, 1 case, 50 pounds. Viking potatoes, 4 cases, 208 pounds. Vagas fish flour, 2 cases, 200 pounds. Fram food jelly, 1 jar, 190 pounds. Marmalade jelly, 1 jar, 54 pounds. Lime juice jelly, 1 jar, 54 pounds. Cadbury's chocolate, 3 cases, 144 pounds. Lactose sarin cocoa, 1 case, 18 pounds. Milk, 10 cases of 48 tins, 480 pounds. Tea, 1 case, 20 pounds. English pemmican, 13 cases, 756 pounds. Danish pemmican, 1 case, 68 pounds. Dried liver patties, 3 cases, 204 pounds. Vril food, 5 cases, 208 pounds. Besides these, 2 tins of salt, 1 tin of mustard, and 1 tin of pepper. When all the stores were ready and packed, they were provisionally stowed at certain fixed points on deck, under the awning forward. I did not want them taken out on the ice until later in the year, or until circumstances rendered it necessary. We had still abundance of coal, about 100 tons. I considered that 20 tons would be about enough for 6 months' consumption on the ice. With that quantity, therefore, we filled butts, casks, and sacks, and took it out on the ice, together with 1,400 pounds of tinned potatoes, about 45 gallons of petroleum, about 80 gallons of gas oil, and about 34 gallons of coal oil. As the ship was still deeply laden, I wished to lighten her as much as possible, if only it could be managed without exposing to risk any of the stores which had to be unloaded. After the windmill was worn out and taken away, we had, of course, no use for the battery and dynamo, so we took the whole concern to pieces and packed it up with lamps, globes, and everything belonging to it. The same was done with the petroleum motor. The horse mill was also taken down and put out on the ice with a lot of heavy materials. 1 longboat had been put out earlier, and now we took the other down from the davits and took it up to the great hummock. But as the hummock shortly afterwards drifted a good way off from us, the boat, with everything else that lay there, was brought back again and placed upon the great ice-floe to which we were moored, our estate, as we used to call it. On top of the davits and right aft to the half-deck, we ran a platform of planks on which the sledges, kayaks, and other things were to be laid up in the winter. On July 22nd, we continued our deep-sea soundings, taking 2 on that day, the first to 1,354 fathoms, 2,500 meters, and the second to 1,625 fathoms, 3,000 meters, without touching bottom either time. In order to make sure that the lead should sink, we lowered away the line very slowly, so that it took 2 hours and a quarter to reach a depth of 3,000 meters. On the 23rd, we again took 2 soundings, one of 1,840 fathoms, 3,400 meters, without finding bottom, and then one in which we found bottom at 2,056 fathoms, 3,800 meters. It took 2 hours and a half to lower the lead to the latter depth. Finally, on June 24th, we again took a sounding of 3,600 meters without finding bottom, and therefore concluded the depth to be from 37 to 3,800 meters. On July 7th, the doctor rowed out in the Fram in search of algae, but came back empty-handed. There were remarkably few algae to be found this summer, nor did there seem to be so much animal life in the water as there had been the year before. For a few days after she got loose, the Fram lay in a very good position in the pool, but during the night of August 14th a high block of ice came floating down the lane, which had now widened a little, and jammed itself between the ship's side and the farther edge of the pool, which it thus entirely blocked. As we did not like having this uncomfortable and dangerous colossus close at our side, in case we should remain at the same spot throughout the autumn and winter, we determined to blast it away. Scott Hansen and Nordahl at once took this in hand and accomplished the task after several days' labor. On Saturday afternoon, August 17th, a pretty strong ice pressure suddenly set in around us. In the course of a few minutes, the Fram was lifted 22 inches by the stern and 14 inches by the bow. In stately fashion, with no noise, and without heeling over in the least, the heavy vessel was swiftly and lightly raised, as if she had been a feather, a spectacle at once impressive and reassuring. The next day the ice slackened a little again, and the ship was once more afloat. So it lay quietly until the morning of the 21st, when another strong pressure began. The ship now lay in a very awkward position, with a high hummock on each side, which gripped her amidships for a space of about 9 yards and screwed her up 6 or 8 inches. But the pressure ended in half an hour or so, and the Fram sank again to her former berth. When there were symptoms of pressure, we always tried to warp the ship as far away as possible from the threatening point, and occasionally we succeeded. But during the stormy weather with southerly winds which prevailed at this time, it was often quite impossible to get her to budge, for she offered a great surface to the wind with her heavy rigging and the high awning forward. Our united forces were often unable to move her an inch, and ice anchors, moorings, and warping cables were perpetually breaking. At last, on August 22nd, we succeeded in warping the ship along a bit, so that we might hope to escape pressure if the ice should again begin to pinch. As the ice soon after slackened a good deal and became more broken than before, we some days later made another attempt to haul her a little farther, but had soon to give it up. There was not enough space between the 2 great floes on either hand of us. We now lay at the same spot until September 2nd, with half a gale blowing continually from the southwest, and with heavy rain now and then. On the evening of August 30th, for instance, we had a violent rainstorm, which loosened the ice coating of the rigging and made a frightful racket as it brought the pieces of ice clattering down upon the deck-house, and the awning. Our estate was very thoroughly ploughed, harrowed, and drained at this time by wind, rain, pressure, and other such doughty laborers. Then came the tiresome business of moving the things out from the ship, which involved the cutting up and parceling out of almost the whole estate, so that what was left open to us was scanty and cramped enough. Thus reduced, the estate now formed an approximately oblong floe, with its greatest length from east to west, and surrounded on all sides by more or less open rifts and lanes. The Fram lay moored to the north side, close to the northeast point, with her bow heading west. Immediately astern of her, and separated from the point only by a narrow lane, lay a large floe upon which was stowed, among other things, a part of our provision of coal. Far off to the westward the great hummock still lay drifting. While the other sides of the estate were pretty nearly straight, the east side formed a concave arc or bay, which offered an excellent winter berth for the Fram. But there was no possibility of getting the ship into it so long as the channel between the estate and the floe to eastward remained closed. Late in the afternoon of September 2nd, the ice at last slackened so much that we could make an attempt. By the help of our tackle, we managed to get her warped a ship's length eastward, but it was impossible for the moment to get her any farther, as the new ice was already pretty thick. The night temperature was -5°C, and also a good deal packed. Nor was it any use to bring the ice saw into play and cut a channel, for the slush was so deep that we could not shove the fragments aside or under each other. The next day began with half a gale from the southeast and rain, but at 6 o'clock the wind moderated and veered to the south, and at 8 o'clock the ice around the lane began to slacken a good deal. As there was now more room, we made good progress with cutting our way through the new ice, and before midday we had got the Fram hauled into the bay and moored in the winter harbor, which we all hoped might prove her last. When Nansen and Johansen set out, they left 7 dogs behind, the bitch Susie and the 6 youngest puppies, Kaben, Snodden, Bella, Skvint, Axel, and Boris. On April 25th, Susie gave birth to 12 puppies. We had made a cozy little kennel for her on deck, lining it with reindeer skin. Petterson came down in the morning and told us that Susie was running round whining and howling. Mogstad and I went up and shut her into the kennel, where she at once gave birth to a puppy. When the afternoon came and we saw that more and more citizens were being added to our community, we feared that the mother would not be able to warm all her litter, and consequently removed the whole family into the saloon. All the puppies were large and handsome, most of them quite white, and looking as though they would turn out regular little Bjelkir, as the Samoyeds call all white dogs. They grew and throve excellently as saloon passengers, and were petted and spoiled by everyone. They made their home in the saloon for a month, and then we transferred them to the above-mentioned kennel on deck. After they had been up there for some weeks, it appeared as though they had suddenly stopped growing, although they were constantly well fed with raw bear's flesh, milk, and the broken meat from our table. About the 2nd week of August, 2 of the puppies died of convulsions. The doctor managed to save a 3rd by means of warm baths and careful nursing. At the end of the month another of them was seized with convulsions and died, although it too was treated with warm baths and comfortably housed, first in the saloon and afterwards in the workroom. In the beginning of September, when the frequent rain made things very moist and uncomfortable in the kennel and on deck, we built a kennel out on the ice with a tarpaulin roof and a floor of planks, with plenty of shavings spread over them. While it was being built, we let the whole pack of dogs out upon the ice, but after playing for half an hour, the puppies, one after another, began to have convulsions. The attacks passed quickly over, however. We drenched them with soap and water, and then settled them in their new abode. As the puppies grew older, we had to keep a sharp watch upon them when we let them out upon the ice. They romped and gamboled with such ungovernable glee that it often happened that one or other of them plumped into the water and had to be laboriously fished out again by the master of the hounds for the time being, or whoever else happened to be at hand. Moreover, they soon acquired a taste for longer excursions and followed our tracks far over the ice. One day the doctor and I were out photographing. At a considerable distance from the ship, we came upon a large pool of fresh water and took a little rest upon its inviting, mirror-like ice. While we lay there chatting at our ease, we saw Cobben coming after us. As soon as he caught sight of us, he stopped and stood wondering what strange creatures we could be. Then we began to creep on all fours towards him, and the moment we did so, Cobben found his legs to some purpose. He set off homeward as though he were running for dear life, and even when we got back to the ship and several other puppies met us and knew us, the poor creature was still so panic-stricken that it was a good while before he ventured to come near us. On September 28th, we again lost one of the puppies. It was seized with convulsions and lay whining and howling all day. As the evening advanced and it became paralyzed along one side, there was no hope of saving it, so we put an end to its misery. It was pitiful to see how these pretty little creatures suffered when the convulsions came upon them. On October 9th, Skvint gave birth to puppies, but as so young an animal could not have brought them up, especially in such a cold season, we allowed her to keep only one of them as an experiment. The others were at once killed. A week later, Susie produced a second litter, 2 he-dogs and 9 she-dogs. We let her keep the 2 males and one of the females. It proved inadvisable to have both the mothers with their families in the same kennel. If one of the mothers went out for a moment, the other at once took all the puppies into her keeping, and then there was a battle royal when the first one returned and wanted to reclaim her property. Something of this sort had no doubt occurred one night in the case of Skvint, whom Henriksen found in the morning lying at the door of the kennel, frozen so fast to the ice that it cost us a good deal of trouble to get her loose again. She must have had anything but a pleasant night. The thermometer had been down to -33° C, -27.4° F, and her tail was frozen fast to one of her hind legs, so that we had to take her down into the saloon to get her thawed. To obviate such misadventures for the future, I had a detached villa built for her, where she could be at peace with her child. One evening when Mogstad was housing the puppies for the night, 2 of them were missing. Henriksen and I at once set off with lanterns and guns to hunt for them. We thought that there had been a bear in the neighborhood, as we had heard a great deal of barking earlier in the day out upon the ice to the east of the ship, but we could find no tracks. After supper we set out again, 5 of us, all carrying lanterns. After an hour's search along the lanes and up in the pressure ridges, we at last found the puppies on the other side of a new lane. Although the new ice on the lane was strong enough to bear them, they were so terrified after having been in the water that they dared not come over to us, and we had to make a long detour to get hold of them. In the middle of December we took the youngest puppies on board, as they had now grown so big and ran away if they were not very closely watched. The gangway was left open at night, so that the mothers could come into them from the ice whenever they wanted to. In respect to temper, there was a great difference between the generation of dogs we had originally taken on board and those we now had. While the former were great fighters, perpetually at feud with each other and often to the death, the latter were exceedingly quiet and well-behaved, although wild and fierce enough when it came to chasing a bear. Now and then there would be a little squabble among them, but this was rare. Axel was the worst of them. Shortly before Christmas he all of a sudden made a fierce attack upon the unoffending Cobben, against whom he bore a grudge. But he got the rope's end for supper several times, and that improved his manners amazingly. During the first half of September the weather was very unsettled, with prevailing westerly and southwesterly winds, a good deal of rain and snow, especially rain and frequent disturbance in the ice. The frost at night, which sometimes reached 10° or 11°, soon made the new ice strong enough to bear a man, except just at the stern of the ship, where all the slops were thrown out. Here the ice was much broken up and formed a thick slush, the surface of which was frozen over, but so thinly that it would not bear much weight. Thus it happened one day that 3 men got a ducking, one after another, at the same treacherous spot. The first was Pettersen. He had to go round the stern to look to the log line which hung from the ship's side to port, but before he got so far, down he went through the ice. Shortly after, the same thing happened to Nordahl, and half an hour later it was Benson's turn to plump in. He plunged right up to his neck, but at once bobbed up again like a cork, and scrambled gallantly up on to the edge of the ice without a moment's delay. The observation of the log line had to be postponed, while a grand changing and drying of clothes took place on board. On September 15th, the ice slackened so much that there was quite a little sea between us and the great hummock. The following day the ice was still so much disturbed that we had to think seriously of fetching back the things which still lay there. About midday I took a walk over towards the hummock to find out a suitable transport path, and discovered an excellent one. But some hours later, when I set off with men and sledges to fetch back the things, so many lanes had opened around the estate that we had to give up the attempt for that day. During the whole of September and well on in October, there was almost incessant disturbance in the ice. New lanes opened on all sides, some close to the ship, and there were frequent pressures. The winter harbor we had found proved an excellent one. There was very little disturbance in the bay where the Fram was moored, thanks to the new ice we here had around us, of which the pressure was quite inconsiderable. It was quickly broken up, and the fragments forced over or under each other, while the 2 solid points of the bay bore the brunt of the attacks. Once or twice it seemed as though the Fram would be afloat again before the winter finally chained her in its icy fetters. On October 25th, for instance, it slackened so much in the lane nearest us that the ship lay free from the stern right to the forechains, but soon the ice packed together again, so that she was once more frozen quite fast. The hardest pressure occurred on October 26th and 27th, but the ship was not very severely attacked. Pressure, however, is more unpleasant in winter on account of the deafening noise it makes when the ice is hurled against the ship's side. It was quite different in summer, when the ice is more tough and elastic, and the pressure goes on calmly and quietly. After November 1st, a more peaceful period set in. The pressures almost entirely ceased, the cold increased, the wind remained easterly, and we drifted at a steady rate northward and westward for the rest of the year. During the autumn the drift had put our patience to a severe test. Owing to the prevailing westerly winds, it bore steadily eastward, and day after day we looked in vain for a change. The only thing that kept our spirits up was the knowledge that, if we were going backward, it was slowly, sometimes very slowly indeed. Even several days of westerly wind did not take us so far to the east, but that a day or two of favorable wind would enable us to make up what we had lost with something to boot. September 22nd was the 2nd anniversary of our being frozen in, and the event was celebrated with a little festivity in the evening. We had reason to be satisfied with the 2nd year's drift, since we had advanced nearly double as far as during the 1st year, and if this continued, there could scarcely be any doubt that we should get clear of the ice in the autumn of 1896. As will be seen from the following table, September 22nd also brought us a marked change for the better. On that day the winter drift set in for good, and lasted without intermission through the remainder of the year, so that between that day and the 2nd week in January we drifted from 82° 5' to 41° 41' east longitude. Date, latitude, longitude, direction of wind. September 6th, 1895, 84° 43', 79° 52' southwest. September 11th, 1895, 84° 59', 78° 15' east. September 22nd, 1895, 85 degrees 2 minutes, 82 degrees 5 minutes, calm. October 9th, 1895, 85 degrees 4 minutes, 79 degrees 30 minutes, east. October 19th, 1895, 85 degrees 45 minutes, 78 degrees 21 minutes, east to north. October 25th, 1895, 85 degrees 46 minutes, 73 degrees 25 minutes, northeast. October 30th, 1895, 85 degrees 46 minutes, 70 degrees 50 minutes, north-northwest. November 8th, 1895, 85 degrees 41 minutes, 65 degrees 2 minutes, east. November 15th, 1895, 85 degrees 55.5 minutes, 66 degrees 31 minutes, east-northeast. November 25th, 1895, 85 degrees 47.5 minutes, 62 degrees 56 minutes, northeast to north. December 1st, 1895, 85 degrees 28 minutes, 58 degrees 45 minutes, east. December 7th, 1895, 85 degrees 26 minutes, 54 degrees 40 minutes, northeast. December 14th, 1895, 85 degrees 24 minutes, 50 degrees 2 minutes, calm. December 21st, 1895, 85 degrees 15 minutes, 47 degrees 56 minutes, northeast. December 28th, 1895, 85 degrees 24 minutes, 48 degrees 22 minutes, northwest. January 9th, 1896, 84 degrees 57 minutes, 41 degrees 41 minutes, north. On October 11th, we hauled up the log line and cut a new hole for it in the ice right astern. Hitherto the log had had only 100 meters, 54 fathoms of line. Now we gave it 300 meters, 162 fathoms. After the middle of September, the cold steadily increased, as the following observations will show. Date, minimum temperature. September 18th, minus 12.5 degrees centigrade, plus 9.6 degrees Fahrenheit. September 26th, minus 24 degrees centigrade, minus 11.2 degrees Fahrenheit. October 19th, minus 30 degrees centigrade, minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. November 5th, minus 32.2 degrees centigrade, minus 25.8 degrees Fahrenheit. November 9th, minus 38.3 degrees centigrade, minus 36.8 degrees Fahrenheit. November 22nd, minus 43.6 degrees centigrade, minus 46.4 degrees Fahrenheit. December 31st, minus 44.6 degrees centigrade, minus 48.2 degrees Fahrenheit. The weather was, as a rule, fine during the last 3 months of 1895, with clear air and light breezes. Only now and then, for example on October 29th and November 11th, 26th, and 27th, the wind freshened to half a gale with a velocity of as much as 48 feet per second. In the beginning of September, we found that the Fram was drawing more and more water, so that we had a stiff job every day to pump and bale her empty. But from the 23rd onward, the leakage steadily declined, and about the second week of October the engine room was quite watertight. It still leaked a little, however, in the main hold, but soon the leak ceased here also, the water having frozen in the ship's side. For the rest, we employed our time in all sorts of work about the ship, cutting up and removing ice in the hold, cleaning, putting things in order, etc. Not until September 23rd did the state of the ice permit us to carry out our intention of fetching back the things from the great hummock. The surface was that day excellent for sledges with German silver runners. Wooden runners, on the other hand, went rather heavily. We had also done some road-making here and there, so that the conveyance of the goods went on easily and rapidly. We brought back to the ship in all 36 boxes of dog biscuits and 4 barrels of petroleum. Next day we brought all that was left and stacked it on the ice close to the ship. On September 16th, Scott Hansen and Nordahl set about preparations for building a proper house for their magnetic observations. Their building material consisted of great blocks of new ice, which they piled upon sledges and drove with the aid of the dogs to the site they had chosen. Except for 1 or 2 trial trips which Scott Hansen had previously made with the dogs, this was the first time they had been employed as draft animals. They drew well, and the carting went excellently. The house was built entirely of hewn blocks of ice, which were ranged above each other with an inward slant, so that when finished it formed a compact circular dome of ice, in form and appearance not unlike a fin tent. A covered passage of ice led into the house, with a wooden flap for a door. When this observatory was finished, Scott Hansen gave a housewarming, the hut being magnificently decorated for the occasion. It was furnished with a sofa and with armchairs covered with bear and reindeer skins. The pedestal in the middle of the floor, on which the magnetic instruments were to be established, was covered with a flag, and an ice floe served as a table. On the table stood a lamp with a red shade, and along the walls were fixed a number of red paper lanterns. The effect was quite festal, and we all sat round the room in the highest of spirits. Our amiable host addressed little humorous speeches to every one. Pettersen expressed the wish that this might be the last ice hut Scott Hansen should build on this trip, and that we might all be home again this time next autumn, and none the worse for it all. Pettersen's artless little address was received with frantic enthusiasm. For the rest, Pettersen had just about this time entered upon a new office, having from September 10th onward undertaken the whole charge of Ewell's former domain, the galley, a department to which he gave his whole heart, and in which his performances denoted entire satisfaction to everyone. The only branch of the culinary art with which he would have nothing to do was the baking of Christmas cakes. This Ewell himself had to attend to when the time came. When winter set in, we built ourselves a new smithy in the place of the one which drifted off on July 27th. It was constructed on the pressure ridge where the boats and part of the stores from the great hummock had been placed. Its plan was very much like that of the former smithy. We first hollowed out a cavity of sufficient size in the pressure ridge, and then roofed it over with blocks of ice and snow. As the year waned and the winter night impended, all the sea animals and birds of passage which had swarmed around us and awakened our longings during the short summer deserted us one by one. They set off for the south, toward sunshine and light and hospitable shores, while we lay there in the ice and darkness for yet another winter. On September 6th we saw the last narwhals gambolling in the lanes around the ship, and a few days later the last flock of squaws, Lester's parasiticus, took their departure. The sun moves quickly in these latitudes from the first day that he peers over the horizon in the south, till he circles round the heavens all day and all night, but still quicker do his movements seem when he is on the downward path in autumn. Before you know where you are, he has disappeared, and the crushing darkness of the Arctic night surrounds you once more. On September 12th we should have seen the midnight sun for the last time, if it had been clear, and no later than October 8th we caught the last glimpse of the sun's rim at midday. Thus we plunged into the longest Arctic night any human beings have yet lived through, in about 85 degrees north latitude. Henceforth there was nothing that could for a moment be called daylight, and by October 26th there was scarcely any perceptible difference between day and night. Whenever time permitted and the surface was at all favorable, we wandered about on snowshoes in the neighborhood of the ship, either singly or several together. On October 7th, when all of us were out snowshoeing in the morning, the mate found a log of driftwood 7 feet long and 7 inches thick. Part of the root was still attached to the trunk. The mate and I went out in the afternoon and brought it in on a hand sledge. No doubt it had grown in one of the Siberian forests, had been swept away by a flood or by the current of a river, and carried out to sea to be conveyed hither by the drift ice. Besides snowshoeing, we also took frequent walks on the ice, and on November 20th I gave orders that every man should take 2 hours exercise a day in the fresh air. I myself was very fond of these walks, which freshened up both soul and body, and I often wandered backward and forward on the ice 4 or 5 hours a day, as a rule 2 hours in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. On October 8th, Scott Johansen and Mogstad made an experiment in dragging sledges with 230 pounds of freight. They started at 9:30 and returned at 5 in the afternoon, after having been about 4 miles from the ship and traversed pretty heavy country. We did not believe, indeed, that the Fram ran the slightest risk of being crushed in any ice pressure, but it was obviously possible, or at least conceivable, so that it was our duty to be prepared for all contingencies. Accordingly, we devoted much labor and care to securing ourselves against being taken by surprise. At the end of October, we established a new depot on the ice, consisting of provisions for 6 months, with a full equipment of sledges, kayaks, snowshoes, etc. The provisions were divided into 5 different piles and stacked so that the boxes in each pile formed an arch. Thus stored, not more than 2 cases could well be lost even if the worst happened, and the ice split up right under the heap. The provisions consisted partly of pemmican, as may be seen by the list quoted, a very nutritious article of diet, which makes an excellent sort of Irish stew, lobscouse. With 200 grams of pemmican, 100 grams of bread, and 120 grams of potatoes, you can make a very satisfying and palatable dish. On November 28th we passed the 60th degree of longitude and celebrated the occasion by a little feast. The saloon was decorated with flags, and a rather more sumptuous dinner than usual was served, with coffee after it, while supper was followed by a dessert of fruits and preserves. This meridian passes near Cape Fligely in Franz Josef Land and through Khabarova, where we 2 years ago had bidden farewell to the last faint traces of civilization. So it seemed as though we really felt ourselves nearer the world and life. End of File 20. File 21 of Farthest North, Volume 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sharon Riskedahl. Farthest North by Fridtjof Nansen, Volume 2. Appendix Chapter 4, January 1 to May 17, 1896. New Year's Day came with fine, clear weather, moonlight, and about 43 degrees of cold. The ice kept remarkably quiet for about a month, but on February 4th the pressure commenced again. It was not of long duration, but made a great noise while it lasted. The ice all round us roared and screamed as if a tremendous gale were blowing. I took a walk on the ice for the purpose, if possible, of observing the pressure more closely, but could see nothing. The following day we again sallied forth on the ice and found a comparatively new channel and a large new pressure ridge about a mile from the ship. It was impossible, however, to get any comprehensive view of the state of the ice, as it was still too dark, even at midday. The surface of the snow was hard and good, but the hollow edges of the snowdrifts were so deceptive that we every now and then tumbled head over heels. On February 7th, Scott Johansen, Henriksen, Amundsen, and myself took a run northward from the ship. The farther north we went, the more broken and uneven the ice became, and at last we had to turn as we came to a new and wide lane. During the morning a dark bank of clouds had been gathering in the southwest, and now the fog got so thick that it was not easy to find our way back to the ship again. At last we heard the voice of Susi, and from the top of a pressure ridge which we ascended we got sight of the crow's nest and the main topmast of the Fram towering above the fog only a little way off. Close as we were to the ship, it was not so easy to get on board again. We were stopped by a large lane which had formed just abaft the ship during our absence, and we had to skirt it a long way westward before we could cross it. Those on board told us that the opening of the lane had given the ship a great shock, very much like the shock felt when we blasted the Fram loose in August. At 12:30 at night we felt another shock in the ice. When we came on deck we found that the ice had cracked about 30 yards abaft the ship, parallel with the large lane. The crack passed along the side of the nearest longboat and right through one of the coal heaps. On the heap a barrel was standing, which would have been lost if the crack had not divided itself in front of it at about right angles and then joined again after passing through the outer edges of the heap. On the island thus formed, the barrel and some coal bags floated about in the channel. However, we soon got the island hooked to shore, and the coals were all saved, with the exception of a sack of 100 weight which went to the bottom. By way of making sure, I gave orders that the depot should be inspected once during each watch, or oftener if the pressure began again. On February 13th, Henriksen, Amundsen, and I made an expedition southward to examine into the state of the ice in that direction. We found that it was very uneven there too, and full of comparatively new lanes. The channel abaft the ship widened during the forenoon and gave off such masses of fog that we soon lost sight of the ship. The next day it opened still more, and on the 16th there was a very strong pressure in it. The ice trembled and roared like a great waterfall and splintered into small horizontal flakes on the surface. The pressure was repeated almost every day, and more cracks and lanes were constantly to be seen for some time. But after that the ice was comparatively quiet until April 10th, when it again began to be very restless. On the night of the 15th the pressure was very strong in the lane on the port side. We were obliged to haul up the log line with the bag and shift the sounding apparatus. The same night the ice split under two of the provision depots, so that we had to get them closer to the ship. On the morning of the 21st we were awakened by a violent pressure astern. Nordahl came down and woke me, saying that the ice threatened to rush in over the vessel. We found that a tremendous ice floe had been pressed up over the edge of the ice astern and came gliding along unchecked until it ran right against our stern. But the Fram had borne shocks like this before, and now again she held her own well. The ice was split against the strong stern and lay shattered on both sides of the ship on a level with the edge of the half-deck, all the way forward to the mizzen shrouds. The ship now lay almost loose in her berth, and the ice round about was broken up into a mass of smaller floes. As these were passed down by the heavy drifts, it was hard work to get round the ship, as one ran the risk of plumping down into the slush at any moment. Late in the afternoon of May 13th, the lane between the forge and the ship began to widen very much, so that in a couple of hours' time it was about 90 yards wide. From the crow's nest I saw on the southeast a large channel extending southward as far as I could see, and the channel abaft us extended to the northeast as far as my sight could reach. I therefore went out in the pram to try to find a passage through to the channel on the southeast, but without result. After supper I was off again southward, but I could not find any thoroughfare. At 10 o'clock in the evening I again went up in the crow's nest, and now saw that the channel had widened considerably, and reached away southward as far as the eye could reach, with dark air over it. Scott Hansen and I deliberated as to what was to be done. Although I did not believe it would do much good under the circumstances, we decided upon an attempt to blast the vessel free. We agreed to try some mines right aft, and all hands were at once put to this work. First we fired 6 powder mines at about the same spot, but without much result. Then we made an unsuccessful trial with gun cotton. At 3 o'clock in the morning we concluded operations for the time being, as the ice was so thick that the drill did not reach through, and the slush so bad that it was impossible to get the ice floes shoved away. At 8 o'clock the next morning we laid 2 new mines, which Johansen and Nordahl had made ready during the night, but neither of them would go off. 1 or 2 of the mines which we had fired during the day had produced some effect, but so little that it was not worth while to continue. We were obliged to wait for a more favorable condition of the ice. The weather during the first 2 weeks of January was settled and good, with clear air and 40 to 50 degrees of cold. The coldest day was January 15th, when the thermometer showed from -50 degrees centigrade, -58 degrees Fahrenheit, to -52 degrees centigrade, -61.6 degrees Fahrenheit. The last 2 weeks of January the temperature was considerably higher, but dropped again in February, until on the 13th it was about -48 degrees centigrade, -54.4 degrees Fahrenheit, after which it was somewhat higher, about -35 degrees centigrade, -41 degrees Fahrenheit, during the remainder of February. On March 5th the thermometer again showed 40 degrees of cold, but from that time the temperature rose quickly. Thus on March 12th it was -12 degrees, on the 27th -6 degrees, with a few colder days, of course, now and then. April was somewhat cold throughout, about -25 degrees. The coldest day was the 13th, with -34 degrees. The first week in May was also somewhat cold, about -20 degrees to -25 degrees, the second week somewhat milder, about -14 degrees, and on May 21st we had the first rise above freezing point of this year, the maximum thermometer showing at the evening observation +0.9 degrees. Some days during this winter were remarkable for very great and sudden changes in temperature. One instance was Friday, February 21st. In the morning it was cloudy, with a stiff breeze from the southeast. Late in the afternoon the wind suddenly changed to the southwest and slackened off to a velocity of 14 feet, and the temperature went down from -7 degrees in the morning to -25 degrees shortly before the change in the wind, rapidly rising again to -6.2 degrees at 8 o'clock p.m. In my journal I wrote of this day as follows: I was walking on deck tonight, and before I went down had a lookout astern. When I put my head out of the tent, I felt so warm a current of air that my first thought was that there must be a fire somewhere on board. I soon made out, however, that it was the temperature which had risen so greatly since I was under the open sky. Johansen and I afterwards went up and placed a thermometer under the ship's tent, where it showed -19 degrees, while the thermometer outside showed only -6 degrees. We walked for some time backward and forward, and breathed the warm air in deep draughts. It was beyond all description pleasant to feel the mild wind caress one's cheek. Yes, there is a great difference between living in such a temperature and daily breathing in air 40 degrees to 50 degrees below freezing point. Personally, I am not very much incommoded by it, but many complain that they feel a pain deep in the chest. I only find when I have been taking a good deal of exercise that my mouth is parched. The following day, February 22nd, it first blew from the south-southeast, but later the wind changed to half a gale from the west, with a velocity of 55 feet per second. The barometer showed the lowest reading during the whole voyage up till then, namely 723.6 millimeters. The air was so full of drifting snow that we could not see 6 feet from the ship, and the thermometer house out on the ice was in a few minutes so packed with drift snow that it was impossible to read off the instruments. It was not very comfortable down in the saloon, as it was impossible to create any draught. We made unsuccessful attempts to light the stoves, but soon had to take the fire away to prevent suffocation by smoke. Sunday night the storm abated, but on Monday and Tuesday there was again half a gale, with snowfall and drift, and nearly 28 degrees of frost. Not before Wednesday afternoon did the weather improve in earnest. It then cleared up, and the wind slackened to 20 feet, so both we and the dogs could get out on the ice and take a little exercise. The dogs wanted to get out of their kennels in the morning, but even they found the weather too bad, and slunk in again. We had a good many rough weather days like this, not only in the winter, but also in the summer. But as a rule the rough weather lasted only a day at a time, and did not involve any great discomfort. On the contrary, we had no objection to a little rough weather, especially when it was accompanied by a fresh breeze that might drift the ice speedily westward. Of course, what most interested us was the drifting and everything connected with it. Our spirits were often far better in rough weather than on glittering days of clear weather, with only a slight breeze or a calm and a brilliant aurora borealis at night. With the drift we had reason to be well satisfied, especially in January and the first week in February. During that time we drifted all the way from the 48th to the 25th degree of longitude, while our latitude kept steady, about 84 degrees 50 minutes. The best drift we had was from January 28th to February 3rd, when there was a constant stiff breeze blowing from the east, which on Sunday, February 2nd, increased to a speed of 58 feet 6 inches to 69 feet a second, or even more during squalls. This was, however, the only real gale during the whole of our voyage. On Saturday, February 1st, we passed the longitude of Sverdrup, and celebrated the occasion by some festivities in the evening. On February 15th we were in 84 degrees 20 minutes north latitude and 23 degrees 28 minutes east longitude, and we now drifted some distance back, so that on February 29th we were in 27 degrees east longitude. Afterwards the drift westward was very slow, but it was better towards the south, so that on May 16th we were at 83 degrees 45 minutes north latitude and 12 degrees 50 minutes east longitude. The drift gave occasion to many bets, especially when it was good and spirits proportionately high. One day at the end of January, when the line showed that we were drifting briskly in the right direction, Henriksen found his voice and said, "We have never made a bet before, Captain. Suppose we make a bet now as to how far south we have got." "All right," I said, and we accordingly made a bet of a ration of salmon, I that we were not south of 84 degrees 40 minutes, or between 40 minutes and 41 minutes, and he said we were between 36 minutes and 37 minutes. Scott Hansen then took an observation and found that Henriksen had lost. The latitude was 84 degrees 40.2 minutes. Since the last bird of passage left us, we had nowhere seen a single living creature, right up to February 28th. Not even a bear had been seen during our many rambles on the ice. At 6 a.m. Pedersen came rushing into the cabin and told me that he saw 2 bears near the ship. I hurried up on deck, but it was still so dark that I could not at once get sight of them, although Pedersen was pointing in their direction. At last I saw them trotting along slowly towards the ship. About 150 yards away they stopped. I tried to take aim at them, but as it was still too dark to be sure of my shot, I waited a little, hoping that they would come nearer. They stood for a time staring at the ship, but then wheeled round and sneaked off again. I asked Pedersen if he had something to fry which would smell really nice and strong and attract the bears back. He stood ruminating a little, then ran downstairs and came up again with a pan of fried butter and onions. "I am blowed if I haven't got something savory for them," he said, and tossed the pan up on the rail. The bears had long been out of sight. It was cold, 35 degrees, I should think, and I hurried down to get my fur coat on, but before I had done so, Benson came running down and told me to make haste, as the bears were coming back. We tore on deck at full speed, and now had the animals well within range, about 100 yards away. I squatted down behind the rail, took a good aim, and missed fire. The bears were a little startled, and seemed to be contemplating a retreat. I quickly cocked the rifle again and fired at the largest one. It fell head over heels with a tremendous roar. Then I fired at the second one. It first turned a fine somersault before it fell. After that they both got up and took a few steps forward, but then they both came down again. I gave them each one of the 2 cartridges I had left, but still this was not enough for these long-lived animals. Pettersen was very much interested in the sport. Without any weapon, he ran down the gangway and away towards the bears, but then he suddenly had misgivings and called to Benson to follow him. Benson, who had no weapons either, was naturally not very keen about running after 2 wounded bears. After getting some more cartridges, I met Pettersen midway between the bears and the Fram. The animals were now crawling along a pressure ridge. I stopped at a distance of 30 yards, but first of all I had to shout to Pettersen, who, in his eagerness, hurried on before me and now stood just in the line of fire. At last the great she-bear got her death wound, and I ran along the pressure ridge in order to see where the other one had got to. Suddenly it stuck its head up over the ridge, and I at once sent a shot through its neck, close up to the head. All hands were then called out, and great was the rejoicing. Our mouths watered at the thought of the delicious fresh meat we should now enjoy for a long time. It was about 16 months since we had last shot a bear, and for 14 months we had not had any fresh meat, except 1 or 2 dishes of seals and birds shot during the summer. We blessed Pettersen's savory frying pan. The bears were cut up and made into steaks, rissoles, roasts, etc. Even the bones we laid aside to make soup of. The ribs were the most succulent. We had them for dinner, and everybody voted that a sirloin of bear was a dish for a king. Accordingly, we all ate very large helpings, with heartfelt wishes that it might not be long before some bears again paid us a visit. After this, Pettersen became so infatuated with bear hunting that he talked of it early and late. One day he got it into his head that some bears would come during the night. He had such a belief in his forebodings that he made all possible preparations for the night and got Benson to join forces with him. Benson had the morning watch and was to call him as soon as the bears appeared. A merry fellow who wanted to make sure of seeing Pettersen bear hunting had taken the precaution to hang a little bell on Benson's rifle, so that he could hear when they started. Unfortunately, no bear appeared. Pettersen, however, had so set his heart on shooting a bear that I had to promise to let him have a shot sometime when I myself was by and had a charge ready, in case the inconceivable should happen and Pettersen should miss, a mishap which he would find it very hard to get over. On Sunday, March 8th, we had another instance of a sudden change in temperature like that of February 21st. In the morning it was cloudy, with a fresh breeze from the east-northeast, but at 3 p.m. the wind fell, and at 6 o'clock changed to a light south-southeast breeze. At the same time the temperature rose from -26 degrees to -8 degrees, and it was very pleasant to saunter round on the half-deck in the evening and breathe the mild air. On March 4th we saw the sun for the first time. It should have been visible the day before, but then it was too cloudy. By way of compensation, it was now a double festival day, as we could celebrate both the return of the sun and Nordahl's birthday in one. On March 14th, it was 1 year since Nansen and Johansen commenced their long ice journey. The day was celebrated by a better dinner, with coffee afterwards and a punch bowl in the evening. Besides the usual scientific observations, which were continued without any interruptions worth mentioning, we also took soundings during the winter, but did not reach bottom with a 3,000-meter line, 1,625 fathoms. On April 13th, Scott Hansen and I took an observation with the theodolite, and Nordahl an observation with the sextant on the natural horizon. According to the theodolite, the latitude was 84 degrees 11.5 minutes, and by the sextant 84 degrees 13 minutes. We had previously ascertained that there was a difference of about 2 minutes between the artificial and natural horizons. In using the natural horizon, a smaller latitude is obtained, even though there is no mirage. The deviation will, however, under favorable circumstances, seldom exceed 2 minutes. But if there is much mirage, it becomes almost impossible to obtain a fairly correct result. As a rule, therefore, in taking observations in the drift ice, one has to use the artificial horizon or theodolite if a very exact result is desired. As the time passed on towards spring, the days became longer and more rifts and channels were formed round the ship. It was time to think of beginning preparations for forcing the Fram ahead as soon as sufficiently large openings should appear in the ice. The things stored on the ice had been frequently shifted about in the course of the winter, but as the ice became more broken up, it was of little use to shift them. So in the middle of April we took the winter depot on board and stowed it away in the main hold. We also took on board the sacks from the coal depot, while the barrels and hogsheads, together with the dog biscuits, kayaks, and sledges, were for the present left upon the ice. The sun at this time became so strong that on April 19th the snow began to melt away on the tent. Along the ship's side it had been melting for several days. The first harbinger of spring we saw this year was a snow bunting, which made its appearance on the evening of April 25th. It took up permanent quarters in one of the sealing boats, where it was treated with groats and scraps of food and soon got very tame. It favored us with its presence for several days and then flew away. The Fram had evidently been a welcome resting place for it. It had eaten its fill and gathered new strength for the remainder of its journey. On May 3rd we were again visited by a snow bunting, and a couple of days later by 2 more. I fancy it was our former guest, who in the meantime had found its mate, and now returned with her to call and thank us for our hospitality. They remained with us about an hour, and did their best to cheer us with their chirping and twittering, but as the dogs would not give them any peace, but chased them everywhere, they finally took flight and did not return again. After the first few days in May, we removed the temporary deck, which had been laid over the davits, cleared the main deck, and took both the sealing boats and the longboats on board. The gangway was also removed, and a ladder put in its place. Next we shipped the rest of the coal depot, the dog provisions, and the sledges. In fact, we took in everything that was left on the ice. All that was now left to be done was to get the engine ready for getting up steam, and this we set about on May 18th. The dogs got on well in their kennels on the ice, in spite of the prolonged and strong cold, and we had very little trouble with them. But after the first month in the new year, some of the bigger dogs became so fierce towards the smaller ones that we had to take 2 of the worst tyrants on board and keep them locked up for a time. They also did a good deal of mischief whenever they had an opportunity. One day, for instance, they began to gnaw at the kayaks that were placed on the top of the largest dog kennel. However, we got hold of them in time before any serious damage was done, and cleared away the snow round the kennel, so that they could not climb up again to go on with this amusement. On February 10th, one of Susie's pups littered. We took her on board and laid her in a large box filled with shavings. We allowed her to keep only one of her 5 pups, We killed 2 at once. 1 was born dead, and she had devoured her firstborn, the cannibal. Some days later, Kara had a litter. She was the only one of the dogs who manifested any maternal instinct. It was quite touching to see her, and we felt sorry to have to take the pups away from her, but we were forced to make away with them, not only because it was impossible to bring them up at that time of the year, but also because the mother herself was only a puppy, delicate and diminutive. In the beginning of March, the October whelps were let out all day, and on March 5th we put them, with the older dogs, under the hood of the 4 companion. In the evening the cover was put on, and when during the night the hole near the edge of the ice became filled up with snow, it got so warm in the hutch that the hoarfrost and ice melted, and all the dogs got wet. The pups felt the cold terribly when they were let out in the morning, and we therefore took them down into the saloon until they were warm again. End of File 21. File 22 of Farthest North, Volume 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sharon Riskedahl. Farthest North by Fridtjof Nansen, Volume 2, Appendix Chapter 5, The Third Summer. On the 17th of May, the Fram was in about 83 degrees 45 minutes north latitude and 12 degrees 50 minutes east longitude. We again celebrated the day with a flag procession, as on the previous 17th of May. Mogstad sat on the bearskins in the sledge, driving a team of 7 dogs, and with the band, that is Benson, at his side. Just as we were arranging the procession for the march upon the ice, 5 female narwhals suddenly appeared, and immediately afterwards a small seal was seen in the lane abreast of the ship, an enlivening sight, which we accepted as a good omen for the coming summer. The great hummock, which was the scene of our merry-makings on the 17th of May last year, was now so far away and so difficult to reach on account of lanes and rugged ice that the festivities in the open air were limited to the flag procession. The cortege took its way southward, past the thermometer hut, to the lane, thence northward along the lane, and then back to the ship, where it dispersed, but not before it had been photographed. At 12 o'clock a salute was fired, after which we sat down to an excellent dinner, with genuine Chateau La Fram, vintage 1896. The table was laid with great taste, and there was an elegant paper napkin at each cover, with the word Fram in the corner and the following inscription: "The 17th May, our Memorial Day, recalls what our fathers have done. It cheers us and heartens us on to the fray, and shows us that where there's a will, there's a way, and with right on our side we may hope to display the proud banner of victory won." During the dinner, speeches were made in honor of the day, of Norway, of Nansen and Johansen, etc. During the days following May 17th, we were occupied in getting the engine and its appurtenances ready for work, and clearing the rudder well and the propeller well. First we attempted to pump water into the boiler through a hose let down into a hole out upon the ice. But the cold was still so intense that the water froze in the pump. We were obliged to carry water in buckets and pour it into the boiler by means of a canvas hose made for the occasion, and carried from the boiler to the hatchway above the engine room. Amundsen thought at first that he had got the bottom cock clear so that he could let the water run direct into the boiler, but it soon became evident that it was too slow work as long as there was still any ice around the cock. Later on we hoisted the funnel and lighted the furnaces, and on the afternoon of May 19th the steam was up for the first time since we got into the ice in the autumn of 1893. Next we cut away as much of the ice as possible in the propeller well and carried a steam hose down into it. It was very effectual. We also attempted to use the steam for melting away the ice in the propeller sheath around the shaft, but without apparent success. We easily procured water for the boiler now by filling the water tank on the deck with ice and melting it with steam. After supper we went down into the engine room to try to turn the shaft, and finally we succeeded in giving it a 3/4 turn. This was victory, and we were all fully satisfied with the day's work. The following day we melted away the ice in the rudder well by steam, and at 1:30 p.m. Amundsen began to move the engine. Some large pieces of ice floated up from the rudder stock or frame. We fished them up, and everything was in order. Amundsen let the engine work some time, and everybody was down with him to see the wonder with their own eyes and to be convinced that he really had got it to turn round. This was quite an event for us. It filled us with renewed courage and hope of soon getting out of our long captivity, though the way might be ever so long and weary. The Fram was no longer a helpless ball, tossed to and fro at the caprice of the drift ice. Our gallant ship had awakened to renewed life after her year-long winter sleep, and we rejoiced to feel the first pulsations of her strongly beating heart. It seemed as if the Fram understood us and wanted to say onward, southward, homeward. The state of the ice around the ship, however, was still far from being so favorable as to give us any prospect of getting out just at present. It is true that symptoms of spring began to show themselves. The temperature rose and the snow vanished rapidly, but we still remained at about the same latitude where we had been lying for months, namely at about 84 degrees. From the crow's nest, indeed, we could see a large channel, which extended southward as far as the eye could reach, but to get through the belt of ice, over 200 yards wide, which separated us from it, was impossible before the thick pack-ice slackened somewhat. We therefore made no attempt to blast the ship free, but devoted our time to various duties on board, did whatever was left undone, got the steam windlass in order, examined all our cordage, and so forth. In the hole in the ice, which was always kept open for the striking of the log line, we had placed the heads of the 2 bears so that the amphipods might pick off the meat for us, a task which they usually perform quickly and effectually. One day, when a swarm of amphipods appeared above the bears' heads, Johansen caught a lot of them in a bag net and had them cooked for supper, intending to give us a regular treat. But we were sadly disappointed. There was not a particle of meat on the miserable creatures, nothing but shells and emptiness. If we put a couple of dozen into our mouths at a time, they tasted somewhat like shrimps, but I am afraid that were we limited to such fare and nothing else, we should soon diminish unpleasantly in weight. In the later days of May, the prospects became brighter as the wind changed to half a gale from the east and north. The ice began to drift slowly towards the southwest and continued to slacken at the same time, so that on May 29th we could see to the southward a good deal of open water, with dark air above as far as the eye could reach. After several requests had been made to me, I decided to make an attempt at blasting the vessel clear. At 1 p.m. we set off a mine of 110 pounds of gunpowder. It had an astonishingly good effect, wrenching up heavy masses of ice and sending them rushing out into the channel. Our hopes revived, and it really seemed that another such blasting would entirely liberate the vessel. Immediately after dinner we went to work to lay out another large mine 20 yards abaft the stern. It gave us an incredible amount of work to make a hole in the ice to get the charge down. We first bored a hole, then we tried to make it larger by blowing it out by means of small gunpowder charges, and later with gun cotton, but it was of no avail. Then we had to resort to lances, ice picks, steam, in short, to every possible means, but all in vain. The ice had, however, got so cracked in all directions, owing to the many charges which had been exploded in the same place, that we presumed that a large mine in the log-line hole would blow up the whole mass. As the ice was thinner at that part, the mine was lowered to a depth of 10 yards. It exploded with terrific effect. A mighty column of water was forced as high as the foretop. It did not consist of water alone, but contained a good many lumps of ice, which rained down for some distance round. One piece of over 100 weight came down right through the tent and onto the forecastle. Other pieces flew over the vessel and fell on the starboard side. Scott Hansen and Henriksen, who were standing on the ice at the electric battery used for firing the mine, were not pleasantly situated when the mine exploded. When the shock came, they of course started to run as fast as their legs would carry them, but they did not get away quickly enough to reach the deep snow. The pieces of ice rained unmercifully down upon their backs. After a great deal of trouble, we laid and fired 2 other large gunpowder mines, besides some smaller ones, but without much effect. We then began to bore holes for 2 gun-cotton mines, which were to be fired simultaneously. But when we had got down 2½ drill lengths, the screw broke, and before we could proceed, new grooves had to be filed on the other drill before we could use it again. At 12 o'clock at night we knocked off work, after having been at it unceasingly since the morning. Next day at 6 o'clock the boring was continued, but the ice was so hard and difficult to work at that although 4 men were handling the drill, we had to erect a small crane with tackle to hoist the drill out every time it got clogged up. The ice was so thick that it took 4 drill lengths, about 20 feet, to make a hole through it. One of the gun-cotton mines was now lowered into the hole, while the other was put beneath the edge of an old channel by means of a long pole. Both mines were fired simultaneously, but only one exploded. We connected the wires, and then the other went off too, but the result was far from answering our expectations. Although the large mines were carried down to a depth of 20 yards where the ice was thin, the resistance was too great for us. The blasting was now discontinued till June 2nd, when during the night the ice opened up along the old lane closed to the vessel. First we fired a gun-cotton mine right abaft. It took effect and split the ice close to the stern. Next we drilled a hole about 16 feet deep right abreast of the ship, and loaded it with 10 prismer, or 330 grams of gun-cotton, equivalent to about 30 pounds of ordinary gunpowder. But as I thought it would be too risky to explode a mine of this strength so near the vessel, we first fired a small gunpowder mine of 11 pounds to see what effect it would have. The result was insignificant, so the large mine was fired. It made things lively indeed. The ship received such a shock that one of the paintings and a rifle fell down on the floor in the saloon, and the clock in my cabin was hurled from the wall. It was evidently felt in the engine room as well, for Amundsen had a bottle and a lamp chimney smashed. On the ice the explosion took such good effect that the ship nearly broke loose at one blow. She was now merely hanging on a little forward and aft. With a little more work we might have got quite clear the same evening, but I left her as she was to avoid the trouble of mooring her. Instead of that, we had something extra after supper. We considered that we had done such a good stroke of work that day that we deserved a reward. Next morning we blew away the ice that held our bow. I myself took a pickaxe and commenced to hack away at the ice which held the stern fast. I had hardly been at work at this for more than 4 or 5 minutes before the vessel suddenly gave a lurch, settled a little deeper at the stern, and moved away from the edge of the ice until the hawsers became taut. She now lay about 6 inches higher at the bow than when she froze fast in the autumn. Thus the Fram was free and ready to force her way through the ice as soon as the circumstances would permit, but we were still unable to move. Even in the month of May there had been signs of whales and seals in the channels, and an occasional seabird had also put in an appearance. During the months of June and July there was still more animal life around us, so that we could soon go in for hunting to our heart's content. During the summer we not only shot a number of fulmars, black guillemots, squaws, auks, and little auks, but also a couple of eider ducks and even a brace of broad-beaked snipe. We also shot a number of small seals, but only got hold of 6. The others sank so rapidly that we could not reach them in time. As a matter of course, we welcomed every opportunity of a hunting expedition, especially when there was a bear in the case. It was not often he did us the honor, but the greater was the excitement and interest when his appearance was announced. Then the lads would get lively and hastily prepare to give the visitor a suitable reception. Altogether, we killed 16 or 17 full-grown bears during the summer, and a young one, which we captured alive, but had to kill later on, as it made a fearful noise on board. One night in the beginning of June, when Henriksen was on his way to the observation house to take the readings of the instrument, a bear suddenly came upon him. Before starting on his scientific quest, he had been prudent enough to go up on the bridge to have a look around and see whether the coast was clear, but he did not observe anything suspicious. When he approached the observation house, he suddenly heard a hissing sound close by and caught sight of a grinning bear, which was standing at a pressure ridge staring at him. Naturally, Henriksen felt anything but comfortable at this unexpected meeting, unarmed as he was. He at first considered whether he should beat a dignified retreat or whether he should fly at the top of his speed. Both parties were equally far from the vessel, and if the bear had evil intentions, it might be advisable to retreat without delay before he approached any nearer. He started off as fast as he could, and was not sure whether the beast was not at his heels, but he reached the vessel safely and seized his gun, which was standing ready on deck. Before he came out upon the ice again, the dogs had scented the bear and at once attacked him. The bear at first jumped up on the observation house, but the dogs followed, so down he went again, and with such alacrity, too, that Henriksen had no time to fire. The bear started off to the nearest channel, where he disappeared both from the dogs and the hunter. In his eagerness, Gorm jumped out upon some pieces of ice which were floating in the thick brash in the channel, and now he was afraid to jump back again. There he sat howling. I heard the wailing, and soon caught sight of him from the crow's nest, whereupon Johansen and I started off and rescued him. Some days later, at about 10 o'clock in the morning, we heard Nordahl crying, "Bear!" and all hurried on deck with our rifles. But the dogs had had the start of us and had already put the bears to flight. Mogstad perceived, however, from the crow's nest that the dogs had come up with them at a small lane where they had taken the water, and he then came down to tell me. He and I started off in pursuit. The condition of the ice was good, and we made rapid progress, but as we had the wind on our side, it was some time before we could distinguish the barking of the dogs so as to be able to guide ourselves by it. Presently I caught sight of one of the dogs behind a small ridge. Soon I saw some more, and at last I sighted the bears. They were both sitting on a floe in the channel, leaning with their backs against a big piece of ice. 2 of the dogs had jumped out upon the floe, while the other stood on guard round the channel or pool. The dogs had played their part well, keeping such a close watch upon the bears that we had no difficulty in giving them their quietus. They both tumbled over on the spot, but as they moved slightly, we gave them a final shot, just to make sure. Well, there they lay, but to get out to them was not so easy. Finally, having walked round the pool, we succeeded in getting out upon the floe from the other side, where the distance from the solid ice was less and where some small floes formed a kind of bridge. We cleaned the game, and then tried to haul the bodies over upon the solid ice. This we accomplished by putting a running noose over the muzzles of the bears and pulling them through the water to the edge of the ice, where we pushed some small floes beneath them, and then with our united strength we hauled them up. When homeward bound we met Nordahl, Pedersen, Benson, Henriksen, and the mate, who had guessed from the report of our guns that there was business on hand, and had started out to meet us with sledges and harness for the dogs. The sledges were lashed together, one bear was placed on each, and with 9 dogs harnessed to them and a man sitting astride each bear, off they went at such a speed that the rest of us had to run to keep pace with them. On the night of June 24th, we again received a visit from 2 bears. Nordahl discovered them when, at 12 o'clock, he went out to the observation house. He came running back and called those who had not yet gone to bed. But when they hurried out upon the ice, the bears saw them immediately and disappeared. 3 days later, a she-bear with a young cub came trotting towards the vessel at noon. We burned some blubber in order to attract them, but the bear was very cautious, and it was some time before she approached to within 200 to 300 yards. Then the mate could not restrain himself any longer and fired, so the rest of us sent her a few shots at the same time, and she fell after walking a few paces. Some of us took the pram and pulled across to the place, as there was a wide channel between the bear and the vessel. The cub, poor thing, was a fine little fellow, with almost perfectly white fur and a dark muzzle. It was about the size of one of our smallest dogs. When they came up, he sat down on his mother's body, remained there quite still, and seeming for the present to take matters calmly. Henriksen put a strap around his neck, and when the mother was conveyed to the channel, he followed quite willingly, and sat down on her back again when she was towed across. But when, on arriving at the ship, he found he was to be separated from his mother and brought on board, it was quite another story. He resisted with all his strength, and was in a perfect rage. He got worse when he was let loose under the companion hood on board. He carried on like a frenzied being, biting, tearing, growling, and howling with wild rage, like a veritable fiend, ceasing only as long as he was occupied in devouring the pieces of meat thrown to him. Never have I seen in any one creature such a combination of all the most savage qualities of wild beasts as I found in this little monster, and he was still quite a cub. In the evening I gave orders to rid us of this unpleasant passenger, and Mogstad ended his days with a well-aimed blow of the hatchet. For about a fortnight we saw no bears, but during the night of July 12th we had a visit from 3, one of which, after a hot pursuit, was killed by Scott Hansen, the mate, Nordahl, and Benson. The dogs, too, did a good service this time. The other 2 bears sneaked off at the first shot and were lost to sight in the fog. On the evening of July 18th, Mogstad and I shot a bear, which we should hardly have got hold of but for the sagacity and alacrity of Bella. The dogs at first attacked him once or twice, but after a short resistance he jumped into the water and crossed over 2 broad lanes, which it took the dogs a long time to get round. He was just about to plunge into a 3rd channel when Bella, who in the meantime had come round, intercepted him not 20 feet from the edge. At a distance of 200 or 300 yards, Mogstad fired and was lucky enough to hit him in the head, bringing him down, and he now made only some feeble attempts to keep the dogs off. I then sent him a shot behind the shoulder, but as he was not quite dead, Mogstad gave him the final one. On July 20th, the mate shot a large bear which came swimming across a channel, and we killed our last bear on the evening of August 6th, but in such an awkward position that we had to leave the meat, and it was as much as we could do to get the hide on board. In the matter of birds, we were also pretty fortunate. For instance, Scott Hansen and I one night shot 9 little auks, 1 kittiwake, and 1 squaw, and the following day 21 more little auks and 2 black guillemots. Henriksen in one day's shooting bagged 18 little auks and 1 black guillemot, and Nordahl 26 little auks and 1 black guillemot, and later on, when there had been an abundance of game for some days, we killed as many as 30 to 40 birds in the course of a few hours. This hunting life had not only a beneficial effect upon our spirits, which occasionally were rather low, but it also gave us an appetite which sometimes was quite ravenous. When we were weighed at the end of the month, we found that whereas some of us had previously been losing weight, we had now steadily and uniformly increased from the time when the ox breast, roast guillemot, stewed kittiwake, squaw soup, and last but not least, ribs of bear became the daily fare on board. Indeed, we stood in need of all the encouragement and good living which our hunting procured us. The state of the ice was anything but cheering, and the prospect of getting out of it during the present year became less every day. During the first days following the release of the Fram, the ice was comparatively quiet, but on June 8th and 9th we had some bad pressures, especially on the latter day, when the stern of the vessel was pressed about 6 feet upward, so that the rudder well was quite out of the water, while the bow was raised about 2 feet, with 4 degrees list to port. On the 10th and 11th the pressure was also strong, especially during the night from 11:30 p.m. till 3 or 4 a.m. Finally, the ice slackened so much on the morning of June 12th that there was a prospect of warping the vessel some distance ahead. As the brash was still very thick, we did not think it possible to haul ourselves along without using the steam windlass, so I gave orders to start a fire under the boiler. But before steam was up, the channel opened so much that we succeeded in warping the ship through the narrowest passage. When steam was up, we steamed through the pool, where I had found a good berth for the ship. As the rudder was not yet shipped, I had sometimes to go astern so as to be able to turn the vessel. We remained there till June 14th, when the ice slackened a little, and we saw a channel in a south-southwest direction, and determined to make for it. So we lighted the furnace, shipped the rudder, and made at full speed for a narrow rift which led into the channel. Time after time we forced the vessel into the rift, but all in vain. The edges would not budge a hair's breadth. I let the vessel remain for some time, working at full speed, endeavoring to force the rift, altering the position of the rudder occasionally. This maneuver was partially successful, as we got the vessel into the rift as far as the fore-rigging, but that was all we could do. The opening began to close up, and we had to return and moor in the same place as before. This was all the more provoking, as the whole opening was not longer than about 3/4 the ship's length. We remained there till the evening of the 27th, when the ice slackened so much that I decided to make a new attempt. We got up steam and commenced to force the ice at 11:30. It was slow work in the heavy ice, and at 2 o'clock we had to moor the ship, having advanced about 2 miles southeast by south. We tried the engine this time as a compound engine, with a favorable result. It made 160 revolutions per minute, but the consumption of coal was, of course, correspondingly greater, almost twice as much as usual. We remained there about a week, until on July 3rd the ice opened sufficiently to allow us to advance about 3 miles through a channel which ran south-southwest. During the night between the 6th and the 7th we made another attempt to force the ice, but had only made about 1 mile when we had to moor again. The southerly wind which predominated at that time held the ice thickly packed together, and there was no drift to speak of. On the other hand, there had been since the middle of June a good deal of current, owing to the set of the tide. We could not, however, observe that the current really flowed in any definite direction. Sometimes the line would show every point in the compass during the 24 hours. The current was, however, often very strong, and would occasionally spin the ice floes around in the channels in a way that made you uncomfortable to look at it. The ship, too, would often receive such violent shocks from these dancing floes and blocks of ice that loose objects tumbled down and the whole rigging shook. The sea continued very deep. For instance, on July 6th, we could not get bottom at 3,000 meters, 1,625 fathoms, But 2 days later, we were then about 83 degrees 2 minutes north latitude, we took soundings and reached bottom at 3,400 meters, 1,841 fathoms. On July 6th, we succeeded in warping the ship some 2 or 3 short stretches at a time, but it was slow and hard work. The ice was bad, and the contrary wind impeded us very much. But though progress was slow, yet progress it was, and I gave orders that the ship should be hauled along as often as there was any opportunity to advance a little southward. But although we struggled along in this manner by short distances at a time, the observation on the 13th revealed to us the fact that we had actually been drifting a considerable way backward, having returned to 83 degrees 12 minutes north latitude. It might seem ridiculous under such circumstances to continue pushing forward, but gloomy as the prospects were, we tried to keep up our hopes and were ready to utilize the very first chance which should present itself. Late in the evening of July 17th, the ice began to slacken so much that we decided to get up steam. True, it closed up again at once, but nevertheless we kept up steam. Nor were we disappointed, for at 1 o'clock in the morning the water opened so much that we were able to steam ahead, and we made 3 miles in a southerly direction. Later in the morning we were stopped by an immense floe of ice extending many miles, and we had to make fast. The whole day following we remained there. About midnight the ice slackened a good deal, but the fog was so dense that we could see nothing. At last on the 19th we made what we considered excellent headway. Starting when the fog lifted a little in the forenoon, we made about 10 miles from 12:30 p.m. till 8 p.m. This stroke of good luck made our spirits revive wonderfully, and they rose still more the following day, when, notwithstanding the fog, and though we had to stop 3 times, we advanced from 83 degrees 14 minutes in the morning to 82 degrees 52 minutes at noon and 82 degrees 39 minutes midnight. From the 20th to the 27th we continued to make good progress. By midnight on the last named day we had reached 81 degrees 32 minutes north latitude. From July 27th till August 2nd it was slow and tiresome work. By August 2nd we had not got beyond 81 degrees 26 minutes north latitude. At the same time we had been carried some distance eastward, namely to 13 degrees 41 minutes east longitude. On Monday, August 3rd, we made about 2 miles to the southwest, but had to remain moored in impossible waters till the 8th, when it slackened so much around the vessel that we were able to proceed again at 9 a.m. However, we had only made about 6 miles when we were stopped by a long, narrow strait. We tried blasting with ordinary gunpowder and later with gun cotton, and time after time we steamed full speed against the smaller floes that blocked the strait, but without effect. These floes, as a rule, are not so small and innocent as they appear. They consist generally of the fragments of old, thick, and very tough pressure ridges which have been broken up. When these pieces get free, they sink deep below the surface of the water, leaving only a comparatively insignificant part of them discernible, while the lower parts may be very large. It was precisely this description of floe that blocked the channel against us. They were so tough that it was useless to try to break them with the stem of the vessel, although we repeatedly made at them with full speed. We could plainly see how the tough old ice bent and rose up at the shock without breaking. The blasting of such floes was frequently impracticable, as they were of such a thickness that we were unable to lay the mine under them. And even if we succeeded in blowing up one of these floes, we gained little or nothing, as the channel was too narrow to allow the pieces to float astern, and they were too heavy and thick to be forced beneath the solid edge of ice. Occasionally it happened that old thick ice suddenly emerged from beneath the water in a channel or opening which we were just about to pass into, thus blocking up the passage before us. On one of these occasions, the Fram received a blow in the ribs that hardly any other vessel would have withstood. As we were passing through an open channel, I saw from the crow's nest one end of a large submerged floe appearing above the edge of the solid ice, and I immediately gave orders to steer clear so as to pass round it. But at the very moment when we reckoned to clear it, the floe was released and came to the surface with such a rush that the spray rose high into the air and struck the Fram at the fore-rigging on the starboard side with such tremendous force that the ship lurched violently and fell about 10 points out of her course until she ran up against some small floes. When the monster floe emerged, it lifted a huge mass of water and sent it like a roaring cataract out into the channel. Something similar happened when we occasionally touched a drifting hummock that was just on the point of rolling over, owing to the quicker melting of the ice below the waterline. The slightest push would be enough to capsize the hummock and turn it over in such a violent way that the sea around us would become as agitated as during a storm. On August 9th, we worked the whole day clearing the channel, but only made slight headway. On the 10th, the work was continued, and in the course of the forenoon we finally succeeded in getting through. During the rest of the day we also made some headway to the south until the ice became impassable, and we were compelled to make fast at 10 p.m., having made about 2 miles. On account of the fog, we were unable to take any observation until the 9th, when we found ourselves in 81 degrees 48 minutes north latitude, the last latitude observation we made in the drift ice. On Tuesday the 11th, we again proceeded southward by dint of arduous labor in clearing floes and brash, which often blocked our way. At 7:30 p.m. we had to make fast in a narrow strait until, in the course of the night, we cleared the obstacles away and were able to proceed to the southwest. Progress was, however, slow, and on the morning of August 12th we were stopped by a very awkward floe. We tried to blast it away, but while we were at work on this, the ice tightened up quickly and left the vessel imprisoned between two big floes. In the course of a couple of hours it slackened again in a southwest direction, and we steamed off in comparatively fair channels until 12:30 p.m., when a floe stopped our farther progress. We had made 9.5 miles in about 5 hours this forenoon. Some thin ice now appeared, and from the crow's nest we could see, when the fog cleared off a little for a few moments, several large channels running in a southerly direction both east and west of our position. Besides, we noticed an increase in the number of birds and small seals, and we also saw an occasional bearded seal, all evidences that we could not be very far from the open water. Between 3 and 4 p.m. we were released from the floes which had held us enclosed, and at 5:30 p.m. we steamed off in a southeast direction through steadily improving ice. The ice now became noticeably thin and brittle, so that we were able to force the smaller floes. From 5:30 p.m. till midnight we advanced about 16 miles. The engine was used as compound during the last watch. After midnight on August 13th, we steered southwest, then south and southeast, the ice continuing to grow slacker. At 3 o'clock we sighted a dark expanse of water to the south-southeast, and at 3:45 we steered through the last ice floes out into open water. We were free. Behind us lay 3 years of work and hardships, with their burden of sad thought during the long nights. Before us, life and reunion with all those who were dear to us. Just a few more days. A chaos of contending feelings came over each and every one. For some time it seemed as if we could hardly realize what we saw, as if the deep blue lapping water at the bow were an illusion, a dream. We were still a good way above the 80th degree of latitude, and it is only in very favorable summers that ice-free water stretches so far north. Were we perhaps in a large open pool? Had we still a great belt of ice to clear? No, it was real. The free, unbounded sea was around us on every side, and we felt with a sense of rapture how the Fram gently pitched with the first feeble swells. We paid the final honors to our vanquished antagonist by firing a thundering salute as a farewell. One more gaze at the last faint outlines of hummocks and floes, and the mist concealed them from our view. We now shaped our course by the compass south-southeast, as the fog was still so dense that no observation could be taken. Our plan was at first to steer towards Red Bay, get our landfall, and thence to follow the west coast of Spitzbergen southward till we found a suitable anchoring place where we could take in water, shift the coal from the hold into the bunkers, and, in fact, make the Fram quite shipshape for our homeward trip. At 7 a.m., when the fog lifted slightly, we sighted a sail onto port and shaped our course for her in order to speak to her and try to get some news of Dr. Nansen and Johansen. In an hour or so we were quite near her. She was lying to and did not seem to have sighted us until we were close on her. The mate then ran down to announce that a monster ship was bearing down upon them in the fog. Soon the deck was crowded with people, and just as the captain put his head out, the Fram passed close up on the weather side of the vessel, and we greeted her in passing with a thundering broadside from our starboard cannon. We then turned round astern of her and fired another salute to leeward, after which hostilities were discontinued. No doubt it was a rather demonstrative way of making ourselves known to our countrymen, who were lying there so peacefully, drifting in the morning mist, and probably thinking more of seals and whales than of the Fram. But we trust that Captain Bottolfsen and his crew will forgive us our overflowing joy at this our first meeting with human beings after 3 long years. The vessel was the Lieut Sestrene, the Sisters of Tromsø. The first question which was shouted to him as we passed alongside was this: "Have Nansen and Johansen arrived?" We had hoped to receive a roaring yes, and were ready to greet the answer with a thundering hurrah and salute, but the answer we got was short and sad: no. Captain Bottolfsen and some of his crew came on board to us and had to go through a regular crossfire of questions of every conceivable kind. Such an examination they had certainly never been subjected to, and probably never will be again. Among the many items of news which we received was one to the effect that the Swedish aeronaut, Engineer André, had arrived at Danes Island, intending to proceed thence by balloon to discover the North Pole. Bottolfsen came with us as a passenger, leaving his vessel in charge of the mate, and accompanied us as far as Tromsø. We reshaped our course about noon for Red Bay, intending to steam from there to Danes Island and see Mr. André. About midnight we sighted land ahead and supposed it to be the cape immediately to the west of Red Bay. It was 1,041 days since we last saw land. We lay to for some time at this point, waiting for the fog to clear away sufficiently to allow us to find the landmarks. As it did not clear, we steamed slowly westward, taking frequent soundings, and soon found ourselves, as we anticipated, right in Norsksundet, Norwegian Sound, and proceeding up, we anchored at 9:30 a.m. off Hollanderneset, Dutch Cape. The fog was now cleared, and we soon saw the steamship Virgo of the André expedition and the balloon house ashore. Through the telescope we could see that our arrival had been observed, and a steam launch soon came alongside with Mr. André, the other members of the expedition, and Captain Zachow of the Virgo. Neither could these gentlemen give us any news of the fate of our comrades. Our spirits became still more depressed than before. We had confidently expected that Nansen and Johansen would reach home before us. Now it seemed as if we were to be the first to arrive. We did not, however, entertain any serious fears for their safety, especially when we learned that the Jackson expedition had spent 2 winters in Franz Josef Land. It was highly probable that Dr. Nansen and Johansen would sooner or later meet with this expedition, and were perhaps only waiting for a chance of getting home. But if they had not met with Jackson, something had evidently gone amiss with them, in which case they needed assistance, and that as soon as possible. Our plans were soon laid. We would hurry home to Tromsø to get reliable information, and in case nothing had been learned there either, we would complete our coal supply, we were not in want of anything else, and immediately proceed to Franz Josef Land to make a search for them, and, as we hoped, have the unspeakable pleasure of bringing them home to our expectant fatherland in our own faithful Fram. Our stay at Danes Island was consequently cut as short as possible. We paid visits to the Virgo, saw the balloon, which was now ready to start as soon as a favorable wind would permit of it, and received return visits from our amiable Swedish friends. During the night we finished taking in water and shifting the coal. The vessel was ready for sea, and at 3 a.m. on August 15th the Fram steamed off with sail set through Snarenburg Bay and out to sea. During the passage across we had good weather and a fair and often fresh breeze, the vessel making good speed, upward of 9 1/4 knots. At 9 a.m. on the 19th we saw the first blue ridges of our native mountains. By noon we sighted Luga, and at 8 p.m. the north point of Lappen. Then we steered into Kvanengun Fjord and anchored off Skjervø at 2 o'clock in the morning of August 20th. As soon as the anchor had fallen, I called the doctor and Scott Hansen, who both wanted to go ashore with me. But as they were too slow with their toilet, I asked Benson to put me ashore in the pram, and was soon at the telegraph station, where I tried to knock life into the people by thundering with my clenched fist, first at one door, then at another, but for a long time in vain. At last a man put his head out of a window on the second floor to inquire what kind of night prowlers were making such a disturbance. It was the chief of the telegraph station himself. He describes the nocturnal incident in a letter to one of the Christianian newspapers in the following pleasant manner. It was with anything but amiable feelings and intentions that at about 4:30 I turned out to see what wretch it was who was making such a lively rattle at my front door. Rather lightly clad, I put my head out of the window and roared out, "Hullo, what's the matter? Deuce of a noise to make at this time of night." A man dressed in gray with a heavy beard stepped forward. There was something about his appearance that made me think at once that I had perhaps been somewhat too hasty in giving vent to my displeasure at being called up, and I felt a little crestfallen when he slyly remarked, "Yes, that's true, but all the same I must ask you to open the door. I come from the Fram." Immediately it dawned upon me who it was. It could be none other than Sverdrup. "Coming directly, Captain," I answered, and jumping into the most necessary clothes, down I went to let him in. He was not at all annoyed at the long waiting or the unfriendly words with which he had been received when he set foot again in his native country after the long and famous expedition, but was very kind and good-humored when I begged his pardon for the rudeness with which I had received him. In my inmost heart I made an even warmer apology than I had stammered out in my first embarrassment. When Sverdrup was seated, the first question was naturally as to the way he had come. They had just arrived from off the coast of Spitzbergen. On the 13th they had got out into open water, where they almost immediately met with Captain Botolfsen from Tromsø, who was there with his whaling ship. They had brought him with them. They had next visited André, who was about to pack up and go home, and had then proceeded to this place. They had first learned from Botolfsen and then from André, who ought to have had some of the latest tidings from Norway, that nothing was known about Nansen, whom they hoped to find at home, and the joy they were feeling at the prospect of reaching home soon was considerably damped by this news. "Ah, but I can give you news of Nansen," said I. "He arrived at Vardo on August 13th and is now at Hammerfest. He's probably starting for Tromsø today in an English yacht." "Has Nansen arrived?" The stalwart form bounded up in a state of excitement rarely shown by this man, and exclaiming, "I must tell the others at once," he vanished out of the door. A moment later he returned, accompanied by Scott Hansen, Blessing, Mogstad, and Benson, all of them perfectly wild with joy at the latest news, which crowned all, and allowed them to give full vent to their exultation at being once more in their native land after their long and wearisome absence, which the uncertain fate of their leader and his comrade would otherwise have damped. And did they rejoice! "Is it true? Has Nansen arrived?" was repeated on all sides. "What a day this is! What joy! And what a curious coincidence that Nansen should arrive on the same day that we cleared the last ice and steered homeward." And they congratulated each other, all quivering with emotion, these sturdy fellows. In the early morning, 2 thundering reports were suddenly heard from the Fram, followed by the ringing cheers of the crew in honor of their absent comrades. The inhabitants of the place, who were fast asleep, were quite startled and soon got out of bed, but when it finally dawned upon them that it could be none other than the Fram, they were not slow in turning out to have a look at her. As they anchored here, the fragrance of the new-mown hay was wafted to them from the shore, and to them it seemed marvelous. The green meadows with their humble flowers, and the few trees bent and almost withered by the merciless wind and weather, looked to them so delightful that our poor island was a veritable Eden in their eyes. Yes, today they would have a good roll on the grass. For the rest, Mother Nature was as smiling and festily arrayed as could be expected so late in the year in these northern latitudes. The fjord was calm, as though it feared by the faintest ripple to interrupt the tranquillity which enveloped the tired and weather-beaten warrior, now resting upon its smooth surface. They were all quite enthusiastic about the vessel. I do not believe there is a man on board who does not love the Fram. Sverdrup declared that a stronger and finer ship had never been built, and was not to be found in the wide world. On my way to the fjord, I met 5 of our comrades. Nordahl hurried at once on board with the glad tidings, while the rest of us settled down with the telegraph manager around a smoking cup of coffee, which tasted delicious. A better welcome we could not have had. But it did not end with the coffee or with the telegraph manager. Soon the popping of champagne corks sounded successively in the houses of the storekeeper and local magistrate, while the telegraph manager sent message upon message announcing our arrival to Dr. Nansen, His Majesty the King, the Norwegian government, and to relations and friends. At 10 a.m. we weighed anchor and set off to meet Nansen and Johansen at Tromsø, passed to the north of Chervaux, and steamed south. Off Ulfstinden we met the steamer King Halfdan, with 600 passengers on board, coming from Tromsø to meet us. We accepted the offer to take us in tow, and at 8:30 p.m. the Fram glided into the harbor of Tromsø, accompanied by hundreds of flag-covered boats, and was received with cheers and hearty welcome. Next day, August 25th, at 4 p.m., Sir George Baden-Powell's steam yacht Otaria, with Dr. Nansen and Johansen on board, arrived. After a separation of 17 months, our number was again complete, and the Norwegian polar expedition was once more united. End of File 22. File 23 of Farthest North, Volume 2. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Sharon Riskedahl. Farthest North by Fridtjof Nansen, Volume 2. Conclusion by Dr. Nansen. What, then, are the results of the Norwegian polar expedition? This is a question which the reader might fairly expect to find answered here, but the scientific observations brought back are so varied and voluminous that it will be some time yet before they can be dealt with by specialists, and before any general estimate of their significance can be formed. It will therefore be necessary to publish these results in separate scientific publications, and if I now attempted to give an idea of them, it would necessarily be imperfect and might easily prove misleading. I shall therefore confine myself to pointing out a few of their more important features. In the first place, we have demonstrated that the sea in the immediate neighborhood of the pole, and in which, in my opinion, the pole itself in all probability lies, is a deep basin, not a shallow one, containing many expanses of land and islands, as people were formerly inclined to assume. It is certainly a continuation of the deep channel which extends from the Atlantic Ocean northward between Spitzbergen and Greenland. The extent of this deep sea is a question which it is not at present easy to answer, but we at least know that it extends a long way north of Franz Josef Land and eastward right to the New Siberian Islands. I believe that it extends still farther east, as I think may be inferred from the fact that the more the Jeannette expedition drifted north, the greater depth of sea did they find. For various reasons, I am led to believe that in a northerly direction also, this deep sea is of considerable extent. In the first place, nothing was observed either during the drift of the Fram or during our sledge expedition to the north that would point to the proximity of any considerable expanse of land. The ice seemed to drift unimpeded, particularly in a northerly direction. The way in which the drift set straight to the north as soon as there was a southerly wind was most striking. It was with the greatest difficulty that the wind could head the drift back towards the southeast. Had there been any considerable expanse of land within reasonable distance to the north of us, it would have blocked the free movement of the ice in that direction. Besides, the large quantity of drift ice, which drifts southward with great rapidity along the east coast of Greenland all the way down to Cape Farewell and beyond it, seems to point in the same direction. Such extensive ice fields must have a still larger breadth of sea to come from than that through which we drifted. Had the Fram continued her drift instead of breaking loose to the north of Spitzbergen, she would certainly have come down along the coast of Greenland, but probably she would not have got close into that coast, but would have had a certain quantity of ice between her and it, and that ice must come from a sea lying north of our route. On the other hand, it is quite probable that land may exist to a considerable extent on the other side of the pole, between the pole and the North American archipelago. It appears to me only reasonable to assume that this multitude of islands must extend farther towards the north. As a result of our expedition, I think we can now form a fairly clear idea of the way in which the drift ice is continually moving, from one side of the polar basin north of Bering Strait and the coast of Siberia, and across the regions around the pole and out towards the Atlantic Ocean. Where geographers at one time were disposed to locate a solid, immovable, and massive ice mantle covering the northern extremity of our globe, we now find a continually breaking and shifting expanse of drift ice. The evidence which even before our expedition had induced me to believe most strongly in this theory is supplied by the Siberian driftwood that is continually being carried to Greenland, as well as the mud found on the ice, as it could scarcely be of other than Siberian origin. We found several indications of this kind during our expedition, even when we were as far north as 86 degrees, furnishing valuable indications as to the movement of the ice. The force which sets this ice in motion is certainly for the most part supplied by the winds, and as in the sea north of Siberia, the prevailing winds are southeasterly or easterly, whereas north of Spitzbergen they are northeasterly. They must carry the ice in the direction in which we found the drift. From the numerous observations I made, I established the existence of a slow current in the water under the ice, traveling in the same direction, but it will be some time before the results of these investigations can be calculated and checked. The hydrographic observations made during the expedition furnished some surprising data. Thus, for instance, it was customary to look upon the polar basin as being filled with cold water, the temperature of which stood somewhere about -1.5 degrees centigrade. Consequently, our observations showing that under the cold surface there was warmer water, sometimes at a temperature as high as +1 degree centigrade, were surprising. Again, this water was more briny than the water of the polar basin has been assumed to be. This warmer and more strongly saline water must clearly originate from the warmer current of the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf Stream, flowing in a north and northeasterly direction off Novaya Zemlya and along the west coast of Spitzbergen, and then diving under the colder but lighter and less briny water of the Polar Sea, and filling up the depths of the polar basin. As I have stated in the course of my narrative, this more briny water was, as a rule, warmest at a depth of from 200 to 250 fathoms, beyond which it would decrease in temperature, though not uniformly, as the depth increased. Near the bottom the temperature rose again, though only slightly. These hydrographic observations appear to modify to a not inconsiderable extent the theories hitherto entertained as to the direction of the currents in the northern seas, but it is a difficult matter to deal with, as there is a great mass of material, and its further treatment will demand both time and patience. It must therefore be left to subsequent scientific publications. Still less do I contemplate attempting to enter here into a discussion on the numerous magnetic, astronomical, and meteorological observations taken. At the end of this work, I merely give a table showing the mean temperatures for each month during the drift of the Fram and during our sledging expedition. On the whole, it may probably be said that, although the expedition has left many problems for the future to solve in connection with the polar area, it has nevertheless gone far to lift the veil of mystery which has hitherto shrouded those regions, and we have been put in a position to form a tolerably clear and reasonable idea of a portion of our globe that formerly lay in darkness, which only the imagination could penetrate. And should we in the near future get a bird's-eye view of the regions around the pole, as seen from a balloon, all the most material features will be familiar to us. But there still remains a great deal to be investigated, and this can only be done by years of observation, to which end a new drift, like that of the Fram, would be invaluable. Guided by our experience, explorers will be in a position to equip themselves still better, but a more convenient method for the scientific investigation of unknown regions cannot easily be imagined. On board a vessel of this kind, explorers may settle themselves quite as comfortably as in a fixed scientific station. They can carry their laboratories with them, and the most delicate experiments of all kinds can be carried out. I hope that such an expedition may be taken ere long, and if it goes through Bering Strait and thence northward, or perhaps slightly to the northeast, I shall be very much surprised if observations are not taken, which will prove of far greater scope and importance than those made by us. But it will require patience. The drift will be more protracted than ours, and the explorers must be well equipped. There is also another lesson which I think our expedition has taught, namely that a good deal can be achieved with small resources. Even if explorers have to live in Eskimo fashion and content themselves with the barest necessities, they may, provided they are suitably equipped, make good headway and cover considerable distances in regions which have hitherto been regarded as almost inaccessible. Mean temperatures Fahrenheit for every month during the drift of the Fram. Months 1893, 1894, 1895, 1896. January, no entry, 32.3 degrees, minus 28.1 degrees, minus 35.3 degrees. February, no entry, minus 32.1 degrees, minus 34.2 degrees, minus 30.5 degrees. March, no entry, minus 35.1 degrees, minus 30.6 degrees, minus 1.7 degrees. April, no entry, minus 6.1 degrees, minus 19.7 degrees, minus 0.6 degrees. May, no entry, plus 13.8 degrees, plus 10.2 degrees, plus 12.6 degrees. June, no entry, plus 29.3 degrees, plus 28.0 degrees, plus 28.9 degrees. July, no entry, plus 32.4 degrees, plus 32.5 degrees, plus 31.8 degrees. August, no entry, plus 30.2 degrees, plus 27.3 degrees, plus 34.1 degrees. September, plus 29.1 degrees, plus 17.1 degrees, plus 14.9 degrees, no entry. October, minus 1.1 degrees, minus 8.5 degrees, minus 6.2 degrees, no entry. November, minus 11.6 degrees, minus 23.4 degrees, minus 23.6 degrees, no entry. December, minus 20.6 degrees, minus 30.8 degrees, minus 27.2 degrees, no entry. Continuous periods of temperature under minus 40 degrees. Years, dates. 1894, January, 11 to 12, 14 to 15, 27 to 29. February, 3 to 7, 11 to 19, 23 to 24. March, 5 to 15, 17 to 19, 25 to 26. November, 14 to 15. December, 8 to 10, 17 to 18, 30 to 1. 1895, January, 14 to 18, 23 to 26. February, 9 to 10, 13 to 16, 18 to 22. March, 19 to 23, 26 to 28. November, 20 to 23. December, 7 to 8. 1896, January, 29th December to 18, February, 4 to 9, 11 to 20. March, 4 to 5. The mean temperature of the 24 hours for these periods. Years, 1894. January, minus 36.8 degrees, minus 39.1 degrees, minus 40.5 degrees. February, minus 48.5 degrees, minus 43.4 degrees, minus 38.6 degrees. March, minus 47.9 degrees, minus 45.8 degrees, minus 40.2 degrees. November, minus 42.3 degrees. December, minus 40.7 degrees, minus 37.3 degrees, minus 42.7 degrees. 1895, minus 41.1 degrees, minus 46.3 degrees. February, minus 41.4 degrees, minus 43.1 degrees, minus 42.2 degrees. March, minus 39.8 degrees, minus 37.7 degrees. November, minus 41.1 degrees. December, minus 39.5 degrees. 1896, minus 45.8 degrees. February, minus 41.1 degrees, minus 43.2 degrees. March, minus 35.7 degrees. End of File 23. End of Farthest North, Volume 2, by Fridtjof Nansen.